Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport bus, her boots hitting the dusty ground of Fort Carson training facility. The Colorado sun beat down mercilessly as she shouldered her duffel bag and looked around at the other recruits. Most were men, towering over her petite 5'4" frame. She could already feel their eyes on her, sizing her up, probably wondering what a small woman like her was doing in advanced combat training. "Look what we got here," sneered Jake Morrison, a bulky recruit from Texas. His voice carried across the formation area. "They're letting kindergarten teachers join the Army now?" A few other recruits chuckled, their laughter echoing in the morning air. Sarah kept her face neutral, though her jaw tightened slightly. She'd heard it all before during basic training. The jokes, the doubts, the assumption that she'd wash out within the first week. What they didn't know was that she'd already proven herself once, graduating top of her class in basic training. But this was different. This was Special Operations combat training, designed to weed out all but the most elite soldiers. Drill Sergeant Williams appeared, his voice booming across the assembled recruits. "Listen up, maggots. For the next 12 weeks, this place will be your hell. Half of you won't make it past the first month. The other half will wish they hadn't." His cold eyes swept over the group. "This isn't basic training anymore. This is where we separate the real soldiers from the pretenders." As they were assigned to barracks, Sarah found herself bunked near Morrison and his crew. She could hear them whispering and laughing as she unpacked her gear. Her movements were precise and efficient, everything folded and stored exactly according to regulation. She'd learned long ago that perfection in the small things often meant survival in the big ones. "Hey, Tiny," Morrison called out. "You sure you're in the right place?" "I think the cheerleading tryouts are down the road." More laughter erupted from his group. Sarah finally turned to face them, her dark eyes steady and calm. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said simply, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that seemed to surprise them. That first week was brutal. Physical training started at 500 hours with a 5-mile run in full gear. Sarah kept pace with the group, her breathing controlled and steady while others struggled. During obstacle courses, she moved with a fluid grace that caught some attention, but Morrison and his friends were quick to point out whenever she needed assistance with the heavier equipment. "Need a boost there, Tiny?" Morrison would call out whenever she approached a high wall or rope climb. "Maybe we should get you a stepladder?" The other recruits began to echo his sentiment. Sarah became the target of constant jokes and dismissive comments. They called her tiny, short stack, and worse. During mess hall meals, conversations would stop when she sat down, replaced by snickering and whispered comments about her size and capability. But Sarah endured it all with the same quiet determination she'd shown her entire life. Growing up in a rough neighborhood in East Los Angeles, she'd learned early that actions spoke louder than words. Her father, a construction worker, had taught her that respect was earned through perseverance and skill, not through size or volume of voice. During weapons training, Sarah's true abilities began to show. Her marksmanship scores were consistently in the top 3 of the class. Her hands remained steady under pressure, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. The shooting instructor, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, noticed her potential immediately. "Good grouping, Martinez," he said quietly after one particularly impressive session. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" "My father taught me, Sergeant," Sarah replied. "Started when I was 12. Rodriguez nodded approvingly, but kept his praise quiet. He'd seen talented recruits get targeted for standing out too much too early. The harassment continued daily. During combat drills, Morrison would accidentally bump into her, causing her to stumble. Others would exclude her from study groups or team exercises whenever possible. They made sure she knew she was unwelcome, an outsider in their brotherhood of warriors. One evening, as Sarah cleaned her rifle in the barracks, she overheard Morrison talking to his friends. "I give her another week," he was saying. "She's good with a gun, I'll give her that. But when things get really tough, when the real pressure hits, she'll crack." They always do. Sarah's hands never paused in their methodical cleaning of her weapon. She'd heard similar predictions her entire life. Teachers who said she'd never graduate high school. Guidance counselors who suggested she aim for more realistic goals. Even some family members who thought military service was no place for a young woman. What none of them knew, what Sarah kept hidden beneath her quiet exterior, was the fire that burned inside her. It wasn't the loud, boastful confidence of someone like Morrison. It was something deeper, forged in the streets of Los Angeles and tempered by years of proving herself in a world that constantly underestimated her. As she finished cleaning her rifle, Sarah caught her reflection in the small mirror above her bunk. For just a moment, she allowed herself a small smile. Let them underestimate her. Let them think she was just another recruit who'd wash out when things got tough. They had no idea what was coming. The sleeve of her shirt had ridden up slightly as she worked, revealing the edge of a tattoo on her upper arm. It was mostly hidden, just a glimpse of black ink against her skin. Sarah quickly adjusted her sleeve, covering it completely. Some secrets were worth keeping, at least for now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and undoubtedly more harassment from Morrison and his crew. But Sarah Martinez had faced worse odds before and emerged victorious. This time would be no different. She settled into her bunk, her mind already preparing for whatever the next day would bring. In the darkness of the barracks, she could hear the quiet conversations of other recruits, some expressing doubts about their own abilities, others boasting about their confidence. Sarah remained silent, as she always did. Words were cheap. Performance was everything, and when the time came to prove herself, she would be ready. The third week of training brought the survival exercise that every recruit dreaded. Dropped in the Colorado wilderness with minimal supplies, they had 72 hours to navigate back to base camp while avoiding capture by the hunter teams. It was designed to test not just physical endurance but mental toughness and tactical thinking under extreme stress. Sarah found herself paired with 3 other recruits, including Morrison. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she kept her thoughts to herself as they studied the map and planned their route. Morrison immediately assumed leadership of the group, his voice commanding and confident. "All right, listen up," he announced, spreading the map on the ground. "We'll take the ridge route, move fast and hard. Should get us back in 36 hours, maybe less." He pointed to a direct path that would take them over exposed mountain terrain. Sarah studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes and potential observation points. "That route exposes us for almost 8 miles, she said quietly. "The hunter teams will spot us easily from the valley." Morrison glanced at her dismissively. "You got a better idea, Tiny?" Sarah pointed to a longer route that wound through dense forest and followed creek beds. "This adds maybe 6 hours to our journey but keeps us under cover. We can move at night through the open sections." "Takes too long," Morrison snapped. "We stick with my plan." The other 2 recruits, Peters and Williams, nodded agreement with Morrison. Sarah didn't argue further. She'd learned that sometimes you had to let people make their mistakes before they'd listen to alternatives. They started before dawn, moving up the mountain slope with Morrison setting a punishing pace. Sarah kept up easily, her smaller frame actually an advantage in the rocky terrain. She moved quietly, instinctively choosing the best footing while the others crashed through the brush with unnecessary noise. By mid-morning, they'd reached the ridgeline exactly as Morrison had planned. The view was spectacular, rolling mountains stretching to the horizon under a brilliant blue sky. It was also completely exposed, visible from multiple vantage points in the valley below. "See?" Morrison panted, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Perfect timing. We're making great progress." Sarah was studying the valley through a small pair of binoculars she'd brought. In the distance, she could see the glint of sunlight off metal, movement that didn't belong in the natural landscape. "We've got company," she said simply. "What?" Morrison grabbed the binoculars. "Where?" 2 o'clock, about 3 miles out. Vehicle moving along the access road. "And there's another team on foot, northwest ridge." Morrison studied the areas she'd indicated, his confidence wavering. "I don't see anything." Sarah didn't argue. She'd spotted the hunter teams 5 minutes ago and had been tracking their movement patterns. Her father had taught her to hunt in the mountains of New Mexico during summers, developing an eye for movement and signs that most people missed. "We need to get off this ridge now," she said. "They'll have us triangulated within the hour." "Negative," Morrison insisted, though his voice had lost some of its authority. "We stick to the plan. Speed is our advantage." They continued along the exposed ridge for another hour before the radio crackled to life. "Team 4, you are being observed. Evasion protocols are now in effect." Morrison's face went pale. They were being hunted. The next 6 hours turned into a nightmare of cat and mouse through the wilderness. The hunter teams seemed to anticipate their every move, always one step ahead. Morrison's direct route had made them predictable, and now they were paying the price. As night fell, they found themselves pinned down in a small ravine, hunter teams positioned on both sides. They'd been moving for 16 hours straight with minimal water and no food. Peters was showing signs of dehydration, and Williams had twisted his ankle on a loose rock. "This is bad," Morrison whispered, his earlier bravado completely gone. "They've got us boxed in." Sarah had been silent for most of the day, following Morrison's lead despite her reservations. Now, with the team facing capture or failure, she finally spoke up. "There's a way out," she said quietly. "But we do it my way." Morrison started to protest, but Peters cut him off. "Let her talk, man. Your plan got us into this mess." Sarah pulled out the map and pointed to their location. "There's a creek bed that runs through this ravine. It's not marked because it's seasonal, but I can hear the water. We follow it downstream for about 2 miles, then cut east through the timber." "That'll take us completely off course," Morrison objected. "No," Sarah replied calmly. "It connects with the main drainage system here." She pointed to a spot on the map. "From there, we can approach the base camp from the south, through the training area they cleared last month. They won't expect us to come from that direction." Williams looked skeptical. "How do you know about cleared training areas?" "I studied the satellite photos in the base library before we deployed," Sarah said simply. "Also talked to the supply sergeant who delivered equipment there last week." Morrison stared at her. "You planned for this?" "I planned for contingencies," Sarah corrected. "It's what you do when lives are on the line." They had no choice but to trust her plan. Sarah took point, leading them down into the creek bed where the sound of running water masked their movement. Her navigation was flawless, following terrain features that weren't marked on any map but reading the landscape like a book. The water was ice cold, numbing their feet through their boots, but it hid their heat signature from thermal detection. Sarah moved like a ghost through the darkness, somehow finding safe footing even in the treacherous stream bed. "How are you doing this?" Peters whispered as they paused to rest. "Practice," Sarah replied. "Lots of practice." They reached the cleared training area just before dawn, exactly where Sarah had predicted. From there, it was a simple matter of staying low and moving quickly across the open ground to reach the base camp perimeter. The exercise controllers were stunned when Team 4 appeared at the checkpoint. They'd been tracking the hunter teams who had been searching the mountain ridge for hours, convinced their quarry was still trapped in the ravine system. "Outstanding navigation and tactical thinking," the senior controller announced as he debriefed the team. "Textbook evasion and escape." "Who was your team leader?" Morrison opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it again. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her for perhaps the first time since training had begun. "Martinez let us out," he said finally. "Her plan, her navigation." The controller made notes on his clipboard. "Excellent work, Martinez. That was some of the best fieldcraft we've seen in months." As they walked back to the barracks for hot showers and real food, Morrison fell into step beside Sarah. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Several apologies, actually." Sarah nodded but didn't say anything. Actions spoke louder than words, and Morrison's actions over the past 3 weeks had spoken pretty clearly about his character. "I'm serious," Morrison continued. "I was wrong about you. Dead wrong." "Maybe," Sarah replied. "But respect isn't something you give once and forget about. It's something you earn every day." That night, as Sarah cleaned her gear and prepared for the next phase of training, she noticed the atmosphere in the barracks had shifted. The whispered jokes had stopped. The dismissive comments had ceased. Other recruits were looking at her differently now, with something that might have been the beginning of respect. But Sarah knew this was just the start. The real tests were still coming, and she'd have to prove herself again and again. That was fine with her. She'd been proving herself her entire life. What none of them knew yet was just how much she'd already proven herself, long before she'd ever set foot in this training facility. Week 6 brought close quarters combat training, and with it a new level of intensity that pushed every recruit to their physical and mental limits. The training facility's combat house was a maze of rooms and corridors designed to simulate urban warfare scenarios. Live ammunition exercises with paint rounds made every mistake potentially lethal in real-world application. Sarah had been performing consistently well in all aspects of training, but her success in the survival exercise had created a new dynamic. Some recruits now looked to her for guidance, while others seemed determined to prove that her woodland skills didn't translate to urban combat situations. Morrison had been true to his word, treating her with newfound respect, but tensions remained high among the group. The pressure of training was wearing on everyone, and personalities that had been merely abrasive were becoming openly hostile. The morning briefing was delivered by Master Sergeant Thompson, a 20-year veteran with 3 combat deployments. His weathered face showed no emotion as he outlined the day's exercise. "Today's scenario involves a hostage rescue in a multi-room building," he announced. "Teams of 4 will assault the structure, neutralize hostile targets, and extract the civilian without casualties. You'll be evaluated on speed, accuracy, and tactical coordination." Sarah found herself teamed with Morrison, Peters, and a quiet recruit named Davis who had shown excellent marksmanship skills, but struggled with leadership roles. As they studied the building schematics, Morrison automatically began planning the assault. "Standard breach and clear," he said, tracing routes on the floor plan. "Peters and I take point, Davis covers our 6, Martinez provides overwatch from the rear." Sarah studied the layout more carefully. Something about the room configuration bothered her, but she couldn't immediately identify what was wrong. The building had an unusual L-shaped design with multiple entry points and several rooms that seemed to have no tactical purpose. "This doesn't feel right," she said, pointing to a series of small rooms on the second floor. "Why would you need 3 storage closets in a residential building?" Morrison glanced at the plans again. "Does it matter?" "We clear each room systematically, no shortcuts." "It matters because those aren't storage closets," Sarah replied. "Look at the door positions and sight lines. They're designed as observation points. This whole scenario is set up to channel us into a kill zone." Davis looked up from checking his equipment. "What are you thinking?" Sarah traced an alternative route with her finger. "Instead of the main entrance, we breach through the kitchen window on the east side. It puts us behind their expected observation points and gives us access to the stairwell without exposing ourselves to crossfire from the upper level." Peters shook his head. "That's way too complicated. Keep it simple, get it done." "Simple gets you killed," Sarah said quietly. "Complex problems require complex solutions." They went with Morrison's plan. The exercise began with explosive charges blowing the front door. Morrison and Peters charged through first, paintball weapons raised, scanning for targets. Davis followed, providing rear security while Sarah moved to her assigned overwatch position. Within 30 seconds, both Morrison and Peters were dead, hit by paint rounds from concealed positions that Sarah had predicted. Davis lasted another 20 seconds before being eliminated by crossfire from the upper level. Sarah found herself alone in the building, facing multiple hostile targets with a civilian to extract. The exercise controllers expected her to call for backup or abort the mission. Instead, she disappeared into the building's interior like smoke. What happened next became legendary among the training cadre. Moving with absolute silence, Sarah bypassed the main corridors and used maintenance passages she'd identified during her study of the building plans. She appeared behind hostile positions like a ghost, eliminating targets with precise shots before vanishing again into the building's shadows. Her approach to the hostage room was a masterpiece of tactical planning. Instead of attempting a direct assault, she used mirrors and reflective surfaces to identify target positions, then created a distraction by triggering a smoke grenade on the opposite side of the building. When the hostile actors moved to investigate the distraction, Sarah slipped into the hostage room through a window she'd unlocked during her initial reconnaissance. The civilian was extracted without a single shot being fired in the final phase. Total time, 12 minutes and 37 seconds. 0 casualties. The training cadre watched the entire exercise unfold through hidden cameras, their initial skepticism turning to amazement as Sarah demonstrated techniques that belonged in advanced special operations training, not basic combat courses. Master Sergeant Thompson pulled up the video replay, studying Sarah's movements frame by frame. "Where did she learn to move like that?" he muttered to his assistant. "Her file says she grew up in East LA, the assistant replied. "Father was construction, mother worked retail. Nothing unusual." "Nothing unusual, my ass," Thompson replied. "Nobody moves like that without serious training." When the teams reassembled for debrief, the atmosphere was electric. Word had already spread about Sarah's performance, and every recruit was staring at her with newfound respect and curiosity. "Outstanding execution, Martinez," Thompson announced. "That was some of the finest tactical work we've seen in this facility." Morrison looked shell-shocked. How did you know about those observation points? Experience, Sarah replied simply. What kind of experience? Peters pressed. Where did you learn to move like that? Sarah's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of memories she kept carefully locked away. The kind of experience you get when your playground is an active gang territory, and you learn early that being seen can get you killed. It was true, but not the whole truth. Growing up in East LA had indeed taught her to move quietly and stay aware of her surroundings. But those skills had been refined elsewhere, in places and situations that weren't part of her official military record. Gang territory teaches you survival, Thompson said thoughtfully. But what you did in there was advanced tactical training. Military level. Sarah met his gaze steadily. Sometimes survival and tactics are the same thing, Sergeant. The questions continued during evening chow, but Sarah deflected them with the same quiet determination she brought to everything else. She'd learned long ago that mystery was often more powerful than revelation, and some stories were better left untold. What her fellow recruits didn't know was that Sarah's experience extended far beyond the streets of Los Angeles. The skills they'd witnessed were the result of training that officially didn't exist, conducted by people whose names appeared on no roster, in facilities that weren't marked on any map. That night, as she lay in her bunk listening to the quiet conversations of other recruits, Sarah allowed herself to remember fragments of another life, training facilities in places with no names, instructors who spoke in multiple languages and moved like shadows, missions that happened in the spaces between official operations. But those memories belonged to someone else, someone who had died officially 2 years ago in a car accident that had left no witnesses and no body. Sarah Martinez was just a recruit from Los Angeles, trying to earn her place among America's finest soldiers. The tattoo on her upper arm itched slightly, as it sometimes did when she thought about the past. She resisted the urge to scratch it, knowing that even that small gesture might draw unwanted attention in the darkened barracks. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and undoubtedly more questions about her abilities. Sarah was prepared for all of it. She'd been preparing her entire life, though most of that preparation had happened in places that officially didn't exist. The important thing was that her cover story was holding. Sarah Martinez, the girl from East LA with exceptional natural talent, was becoming exactly what she needed to be. The question was whether she could maintain that identity when the real tests began. And from the way Master Sergeant Thompson had been looking at her during the debrief, Sarah suspected those real tests were coming soon. Week 8 arrived with an unexpected announcement that sent ripples of excitement and fear through the training company. Colonel James Harrison would be conducting a personal inspection of the advanced training program, and he would be selecting candidates for an undisclosed special assignment. Colonel Harrison was a legend in military circles, though most of his career remained classified. What was known was that he commanded units that didn't officially exist and operated in theaters where conventional forces couldn't go. His visits to training facilities were rare and always resulted in the sudden disappearance of selected recruits into programs that had no names. The preparation for his visit was intense. Every piece of equipment was inspected and re-inspected. Uniforms were pressed to perfection. The entire facility buzzed with nervous energy as recruits speculated about what the colonel might be looking for. Sarah maintained her usual calm demeanor, but inside alarms were ringing. She'd heard Harrison's name before, in briefings that had taken place in underground facilities where her previous identity had been created. If he recognized her, if he connected Sarah Martinez to her former life, everything she'd built would collapse. The morning of the inspection, the recruit stood in perfect formation as Colonel Harrison arrived. He was a tall, lean man in his 50s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His uniform bore few decorations, but those who knew military hierarchy understood that the absence of ribbons often indicated the most dangerous assignments. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying easily across the formation. "You represent the finest soldiers America has to offer, but being fine isn't enough for where some of you are going." He began walking through the ranks, stopping occasionally to study individual recruits. His questions were sharp and probing, designed to reveal character rather than knowledge. When he reached Morrison, the colonel paused. "Tell me about leadership, son." Morrison straightened even further. Leadership means taking charge, sir. Making decisions and ensuring they're followed. Interesting, Harrison replied. And if your decisions are wrong? Morrison hesitated. Then you adapt and overcome, sir. Do you? Or do you learn to listen to people who might know better? The colonel's eyes flicked momentarily toward Sarah before moving on. He continued down the line, asking each recruit different questions, probing for weaknesses and strengths that weren't visible on paper. When he reached Sarah, he stopped and studied her for a long moment. Martinez, he said, reading her name tape. Where are you from? Los Angeles, California, sir. Family military? No, sir. My father was in construction. Harrison nodded slowly. What drives you, Martinez? Why are you here? It was a simple question, but Sarah sensed layers of meaning beneath it. I want to serve my country in the most effective way possible, sir. Effective, Harrison repeated. Interesting choice of words. Not honorable, not patriotic, but effective. Honor and patriotism without effectiveness are just good intentions, sir, Sarah replied. I prefer results. Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, a moment of recognition that made Sarah's heart race. But he simply nodded and moved on to the next recruit. The inspection continued with practical demonstrations, combat drills, marksmanship, tactical scenarios, all performed under the colonel's watchful eye. Sarah performed well, but not exceptionally, careful to stay within the boundaries of what Sarah Martinez should be capable of. During the final exercise, a complex urban warfare scenario, disaster struck. Peters, normally a solid soldier, made a critical error in room clearing that resulted in a simulated civilian casualty. The exercise controller immediately called a halt, but the damage was done. Morrison stepped forward to take responsibility as team leader, but Harrison waved him off. I want to hear from Martinez, he said. You seem to have opinions about effectiveness. Sarah found herself in an impossible position. The truth was that she'd seen Peters's mistake developing and could have prevented it, but intervening would have revealed capabilities that Sarah Martinez shouldn't possess. The mistake was tactical, sir, she said carefully. Peters cleared left when the situation called for clearing right. The room configuration created a blind spot that concealed the civilian. Could you have prevented it? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Every recruit was watching, waiting for her answer. Sarah made her choice. Yes, sir. I saw the error developing but failed to communicate effectively. Show me, Harrison commanded. Sarah led the group back into the training facility and recreated the scenario step by step. Her analysis was flawless, her understanding of tactical movement and room clearing far beyond what any basic recruit should possess. She demonstrated alternative approaches with a precision that made even the training cadre take notice. When she finished, Harrison was studying her with undisguised interest. Where did you learn tactical analysis like that, Martinez? Street smarts and common sense, sir, Sarah replied. Plus a lot of reading. Reading, Harrison repeated flatly. What kind of reading? Military history, tactical manuals, case studies. The base library has an excellent collection. It was true as far as it went. Sarah had indeed spent hours in the library, though she'd been refreshing knowledge rather than learning it for the first time. Harrison nodded slowly. Dismissed, he told the other recruits. Martinez remained behind. Sarah's pulse quickened as the others filed out, leaving her alone with the colonel and Master Sergeant Thompson. This was the moment she'd been dreading, when her carefully constructed identity would be tested against someone who might recognize her true background. Sergeant Thompson tells me you've been performing exceptionally well, Harrison began. Top scores in marksmanship, outstanding fieldcraft, tactical innovation that rivals special operations training. I've been working hard, sir. Working hard, Harrison mused. Or working at staying hidden. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. Harrison circled her slowly, like a predator studying prey. Your movement patterns during the urban assault were textbook Delta Force. Your navigation skills during the survival exercise showed GPS-level precision without a GPS. Your tactical analysis just now read like something from the Advanced Special Operations Manual. Sarah remained silent, knowing that anything she said could be used against her. Here's what I think, Martinez, Harrison continued. I think Sarah Martinez from East Los Angeles is exactly who she says she is. But I also think there's more to the story. He stopped directly in front of her, his eyes boring into hers. The question is whether that additional story makes you an asset or a liability. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I'm here to serve, sir, nothing more, nothing less. Are you? Harrison asked. Because in my experience, people with your particular skill set usually serve multiple masters. The accusation hung between them like a live grenade. Sarah knew that her next words would determine not just her future in the military, but possibly her survival. I serve one flag, sir, she said quietly. One country. Whatever skills I possess, whatever experience I've gained, it's all in service to that. Harrison studied her for another long moment, then glanced down at her arm where her sleeve had shifted slightly during the exercise. For just an instant, the edge of her tattoo was visible. His expression changed completely. Roll up your sleeve. Martinez, he commanded, his voice suddenly sharp with authority. Sarah hesitated, knowing that compliance would change everything, but also knowing that refusal would be worse. Slowly, she rolled up her right sleeve, revealing the tattoo that she'd kept hidden for months. It was small, but distinctive. A coiled, black viper with its fangs extended, surrounded by symbols that most people wouldn't recognize. Harrison stared at it for several seconds, his face going through a series of expressions before settling into something that might have been respect. Black Viper, he murmured, so quietly that only Sarah could hear him. I should have known. What? The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Sarah kept her arm extended, the Black Viper tattoo clearly visible under the fluorescent lights of the training facility. Colonel Harrison's recognition of the symbol had changed everything, and they both knew it. Black Viper program, Harrison said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Officially terminated 3 years ago after the Bucharest incident. Sarah remained perfectly still. I don't know what you're referring to, sir. Harrison almost smiled. Of course you don't. Elena Vasquez doesn't exist anymore, does she? Died in that convenient car accident in Prague, along with any official record of her service. The use of her former name sent a chill down Sarah's spine, but she maintained her composure. Years of training had prepared her for this moment, even if she'd hoped it would never come. My name is Sarah Martinez, sir. I'm from Los Angeles, California. Yes, you are, Harrison agreed. Now. But 18 months ago, you were Elena Vasquez, one of 12 operatives in the most classified program the United States has ever operated. You spent 4 years in deep cover assignments that officially never happened, in countries we officially never visited. Master Sergeant Thompson had been listening to this exchange with growing confusion. Sir, if I may ask— No, Sergeant, you may not. Harrison cut him off sharply. This conversation is beyond your clearance level. He turned back to Sarah. The question is, Agent Vasquez, what brings a supposedly dead Black Viper operative to my training facility? Sarah made a decision that would either save her life or end it. The same thing that brought her to the program in the first place, sir. A desire to serve her country? Even after Bucharest? Even after what happened to Alpha Team? The memory hit Sarah like a physical blow. Alpha Team, 6 of the best operatives in the Black Viper program, had been betrayed during a mission to extract a Russian defector. Someone had leaked their location, their identities, their extraction route. 5 had died in the ambush. Only Elena Vasquez had survived, and only because she'd been running surveillance from a distance when the trap was sprung. Alpha Team died because someone sold them out, Sarah said quietly. Someone with access to operational details that should have been locked down tight. And you think that someone was in the command structure, Harrison said. It wasn't a question. I think Alpha Team deserved better than what they got, Sarah replied. And I think the program deserved to die with honor instead of being quietly buried. Harrison nodded slowly. So Elena Vasquez died in a car accident and Sarah Martinez enlisted in the regular army to start over. Sarah Martinez enlisted because she believes the work still needs to be done, Sarah corrected. Maybe not in the shadows, maybe not with the same methods, but the work itself remains necessary. Harrison studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Thompson. "Sergeant, you are to forget everything you've heard in this room. This conversation never happened. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Thompson replied, though his confusion was obvious. "Dismissed," Harrison commanded. After Thompson left, Harrison moved to the windows overlooking the training grounds where other recruits were continuing their exercises. "The Black Viper program was shut down because of Bucharest," he said without turning around. "But also because the Oversight Committee concluded that operatives with your skill level were too dangerous to control." "We were never out of control," Sarah said. "We were betrayed. Were you?" Harrison turned back to face her. "Or did you become so good at deception that even your handlers couldn't tell where your loyalties lay?" It was a fair question, one that Sarah had asked herself many times during the long months of creating her new identity. The Black Viper program had trained her to become someone else so completely that sometimes she forgot where Elena ended and the mission began. "My loyalties never wavered," Sarah said firmly, "even when the program abandoned us." "The program didn't abandon you," Harrison replied. "The program was murdered by politics and fear. There's a difference." He moved closer, his voice dropping to barely audible levels. "What if I told you that the Black Viper program wasn't really terminated? What if I told you it was just restructured, reorganized, given a new name and new oversight?" Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'd say that sounds like something I shouldn't know about." "Unless you were being recruited for it," Harrison said quietly. The implications hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. This entire inspection, his presence at the training facility, even her own exceptional performance that had drawn his attention, none of it was coincidence. "You've been watching me," she said. "We've been watching Sarah Martinez since the day she enlisted," Harrison confirmed. "Elena Vasquez was one of our best operatives. We weren't going to let that talent disappear into civilian life. And if I'd chosen to stay Sarah Martinez, if I'd been content with regular Army service, then Sarah Martinez would have had a distinguished but unremarkable military career," Harrison replied. "But we both know that wasn't going to happen. You're too good at what you do to stay hidden forever." Sarah looked out at the training grounds where her fellow recruits were conducting drills. Morrison was leading his team through a building clearing exercise, applying lessons he'd learned from watching her. Peters was practicing marksmanship, his form improved from techniques she'd quietly shown him. Even Davis had grown more confident under her subtle mentorship. "What about them?" she asked. "My team? What about them? They don't deserve to be collateral damage in whatever game you're playing." Harrison followed her gaze. "They won't be. In fact, some of them show potential for advanced training themselves. Morrison has leadership qualities that could be developed. Peters has excellent tactical instincts once he learns to trust them. And if I refuse your offer, then you finish your training here, serve your country with distinction in whatever capacity you choose, and Sarah Martinez lives happily ever after," Harrison said. "But Elena Vasquez's skills will be wasted, and the work that Alpha Team died for will remain unfinished." The mention of Alpha Team was a calculated blow, and they both knew it. Sarah had survived Bucharest, but she'd never stopped feeling responsible for the teammates who hadn't. Their deaths had driven her to abandon her old life and seek a new way to serve. But the guilt remained. "What kind of work?" she asked. "The same kind you've always done," Harrison replied, "just with better oversight and clearer objectives. The threats haven't disappeared, Martinez. If anything, they've gotten worse." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, seeing the faces of her fallen teammates. Rodriguez, who'd taught her advanced surveillance techniques. Kim, who could disappear in any crowd. Jackson, who'd saved her life twice in Syria. They'd all believed in the mission, even when the mission seemed to abandon them. "I'll need guarantees," she said finally. "You're not in a position to make demands," Harrison pointed out. "I'm not making demands," Sarah corrected. "I'm stating requirements. My team here finishes training without interference. They get assigned to units based on merit, not convenience. And if I take this assignment, I get full operational autonomy." Harrison smiled for the first time since their conversation began. "Still thinking like a Black Viper, I see." "Once a Viper, always a Viper," Sarah replied. "That's what Rodriguez used to say." "Rodriguez was a good man," Harrison said quietly. "They all were. Yes, they were. And they deserved better than what they got." Harrison nodded slowly. which is why we're giving you the chance to finish what they started. Sarah looked once more at her fellow recruits, these men and women who had come to respect her as Sarah Martinez, the tough kid from East LA who'd earned her place among them through skill and determination. In a few hours, she would have to decide whether to remain Sarah Martinez forever or become Elena Vasquez once again. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. 24 hours, Harrison replied. After that, the offer expires and Sarah Martinez continues her normal military career. And if I accept, then tomorrow morning, Sarah Martinez will receive orders for immediate transfer to a specialized training facility. Her fellow recruits will be told she's been selected for an advanced program that requires immediate deployment. Which would be true, in a way. The best cover stories always are, Harrison agreed. As he prepared to leave, Harrison paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Martinez, Elena Vasquez was one of the finest operatives I ever worked with. Her country owes her a debt that can never be repaid." "Elena Vasquez is dead," Sarah replied. "Sarah Martinez is the one you're talking to now." "Is she?" Harrison asked. "Because the woman who cleared that building today, who led her team through the wilderness, who's earned the respect of every recruit in this facility, that woman has Elena Vasquez's skills with Sarah Martinez's heart. Maybe that combination is exactly what the world needs." After he left, Sarah stood alone in the training facility, staring at the tattoo on her arm. The black viper seemed to pulse with its own life, a reminder of who she had been and what she had lost. Outside, she could hear Morrison calling cadence as he led the evening run. Peters was probably cleaning his rifle, applying the techniques she'd shown him. Davis was likely studying tomorrow's tactical scenarios, building the confidence she'd helped him find. The black viper tattoo on her arm seemed to pulse with renewed life as the transport carried her toward a future that existed in the spaces between official missions, where justice wore a shadow's face and the finest soldiers were the ones whose names would never be remembered. Alpha Team would finally get their vengeance, and after that, Elena Vasquez would disappear forever, leaving Sarah Martinez free to choose her own destiny. But first, there was work to do in the shadows. They had become her team, her responsibility, her friends. The thought of leaving them felt like another kind of betrayal, even if it was in service to a greater cause. But Alpha Team deserved justice. The work they'd died for deserved completion. And somewhere in the world, other teams were facing the same dangers that had claimed her former teammates. Sarah Martinez might be content with a normal military career, but Elena Vasquez had unfinished business. The Black Viper tattoo seemed to whisper reminders of oaths taken in underground facilities, of missions that existed only in classified files, of teammates who had trusted her with their lives. Tomorrow she would have to choose between the life she had built and the life she had left behind. Tonight, she had to decide which one served her country better. Sarah spent the night walking the perimeter of the training facility, her mind churning through possibilities and consequences. The Colorado air was crisp and clear, stars visible despite the base lighting. She'd always done her best thinking in motion, and tonight she needed clarity more than ever. At 0300 hours, she found herself at the memorial wall where names of fallen soldiers were etched in black granite. Her fingers traced letters in the darkness, finding the section where Alpha Team's names should have been, would have been, if their missions had ever officially existed. Rodriguez, Kim, Jackson, Martinez, Thompson, Williams, she whispered into the night air. Not their real names, of course. Those had been buried along with their official identities. But they deserved to be remembered, even if only in the shadows. A sound behind her made her turn. Morrison was approaching, his expression concerned rather than suspicious. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, stopping a respectful distance away. "Something like that," Sarah replied. Morrison joined her at the memorial wall, reading names in the starlight. "My grandfather's name is up there," he said, pointing to a section from the Vietnam era. Staff Sergeant William Morrison. Died trying to extract wounded soldiers from a hot LZ. He sounds like a good man. He was. My dad always said Grandpa could have stayed safe, could have waited for backup. But he went anyway because his boys were in trouble. Morrison glanced at Sarah. "Kind of reminds me of someone I know." Sarah didn't respond, but she felt the weight of his words. "Whatever's going on with you, Martinez," Morrison continued, "whatever's got you walking the fence line at 3 in the morning, Just remember that some things are worth fighting for, and some people are worth fighting with. He left without waiting for a response, heading back toward the barracks. Sarah watched him go, thinking about loyalty and sacrifice, about the bonds forged in training and tested in combat. When dawn came, Sarah was ready. She found Colonel Harrison in the base commander's office, reviewing files and drinking coffee that looked strong enough to strip paint. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Decision time, Martinez," he said simply. "I have conditions," Sarah said. Harrison set down his coffee cup. "I told you misunderstood me yesterday," Sarah interrupted. "I wasn't negotiating. I was clarifying my terms of service." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "I'm listening. First, my team here gets the assignments they've earned. Morrison gets fast-tracked for advanced leadership training. Peters gets a slot in special operations prep if he wants it. Davis gets placed somewhere his skills will be appreciated, not wasted." "Agreed." "Second, I maintain contact with them. Not operational contact, but enough to know they're safe and progressing." "That's irregular," Harrison said. "So was Bucharest," Sarah replied coldly. "I won't lose another team because communication was compartmentalized to the point of uselessness." Harrison considered this. Limited contact through official channels only. Acceptable. And third, I want to know who sold out Alpha Team. I want their name, their location, and I want to be the one who brings them in. Harrison's expression hardened. "That investigation is closed, Martinez." "Elena Vasquez's investigation is closed," Sarah corrected. "But if you want Elena Vasquez back, then Elena Vasquez gets to finish what she started." The silence stretched between them. Finally, Harrison nodded slowly. "The investigation never really closed. We just ran out of leads we could pursue through official channels. And unofficially? Unofficially, we have a name. Senator Patricia Hayes, chair of the Senate Intelligence Oversight Committee. She had access to operational details and a Swiss bank account that received a substantial deposit 3 days before Bucharest." Sarah felt a cold rage building in her chest. Hayes had been at briefings, had shaken hands with Alpha Team members, had looked them in the eyes while knowing she was sending them to their deaths. "Proof?" she asked. "Circumstantial but compelling. Not enough for a criminal prosecution. Certainly not enough to move against a sitting senator, but enough to justify a very careful investigation." "What kind of investigation?" Harrison smiled grimly. "The kind that requires someone who officially doesn't exist to investigate someone who's officially untouchable." Sarah nodded slowly. Everything was falling into place. Hayes would never see Elena Vasquez coming because Elena Vasquez was dead. But Elena Vasquez's skills, her training, her burning need for justice, those were very much alive. "When do I start?" she asked. "Your transfer orders will be cut within the hour," Harrison replied. "Sarah Martinez will receive a commendation for exceptional performance and be transferred to advanced training. Elena Vasquez will be reactivated 48 hours later at a facility that doesn't appear on any map. And my team will be told that you've been selected for a classified program and that they should be proud to have served with someone of your caliber." Sarah thought about Morrison, about the respect she'd earned from him and the others, about Peters learning to trust his instincts, about Davis finding his confidence. They would wonder what had happened to her, would probably create legends about where she'd gone and what she was doing. They would never know that Sarah Martinez, the tough kid from East LA, had been a carefully constructed identity for one of America's most dangerous operatives. They would never know that their quiet teammate had once infiltrated terrorist cells in Syria, had eliminated high-value targets in Eastern Europe, had prevented attacks that would have killed thousands of innocent civilians. But they would remember that she had been their friend, their teammate, someone who had earned her place among them through skill and dedication. In its own way, that was more important than any mission she'd ever completed. "There's one more thing," Sarah said. "What's that?" "When this is over, when Hayes is brought to justice and Alpha Team is finally avenged, Elena Vasquez disappears again. Permanently this time." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "And what happens to Sarah Martinez?" "Sarah Martinez gets to decide her own future. Maybe she stays in the military, maybe she doesn't. But she gets to choose based on what she wants, not what her country needs." "That's a hell of a thing to ask for," Harrison said. "It's a hell of a thing I'm offering to do," Sarah replied. Harrison extended his hand. "Welcome back to the shadows, Agent Vasquez." Sarah shook it, feeling the weight of her decision settle around her like a familiar coat. It's good to be back, Colonel. Alpha Team will finally get the justice they deserve. 2 hours later, Sarah stood in formation one last time with her training company. Master Sergeant Thompson read her transfer orders aloud, his voice carrying across the assembled recruits. Private First Class Sarah Martinez, having demonstrated exceptional aptitude and leadership potential, is hereby transferred to advanced specialized training effective immediately. Morrison stepped forward from the ranks. Permission to speak, Sergeant? Granted. Martinez taught us that being small doesn't mean being weak, and being quiet doesn't mean lacking courage. Morrison's voice carried clearly across the formation. She earned her place here, and she'll earn her place wherever she's going. A murmur of agreement ran through the assembled recruits. These tough, proud soldiers who had once dismissed her as too small, too quiet, too different, were now paying her the highest honor they could bestow: recognition as one of their own. Thank you, Sarah said simply, her voice carrying farther than it should have. All of you. As she walked toward the transport vehicle that would take her to her new assignment, Morrison fell into step beside her. Whatever this new assignment is, he said quietly, whoever you really are, just remember that you've got people who believe in you. Sarah looked at him, this man who had gone from her biggest critic to her staunchest supporter. Take care of the others, Morrison. They're going to do great things. What about you? He asked. What great things are you going to do? Sarah thought about Senator Hayes, about Alpha Team, about justice that had been too long delayed. I'm going to finish something I should have finished a long time ago. The transport pulled away from Fort Carson as the sun climbed higher in the Colorado sky. Sarah watched through the rear window as her fellow recruits returned to their training, already becoming memories in her carefully compartmentalized mind. Elena Vasquez was going back to work. Sarah Martinez had served her purpose and earned the respect of soldiers who would never know her true identity. But the skills belonged to Elena, and Elena had promises to keep.